075.
You passed the test. Let's give it maybe...
If you have dinner at the Marriott Marquis restaurant, request Nate's station. He is absolutely one of the best waiters we've ever encountered.
And tip well.
What?
And tip well.
And we did.
Spoken like a waiter.
I think we'll start in about just 3 or 4 minutes. We're waiting for the guards to let in the rest of the crew. I don't know why they do that. Hold con and then don't let people in. But just give it a few more minutes and we'll start. Thank you so much. They just don't care.
They get us for fans, they get in a line. I get to see something like this. Great stuff.
Yeah, I'll be bringing them over. Sure. Oh, in fact, that's yeah.
In the first row before Artist Alleys is a vendor named Cool Lines Art. I am at one of their tables at the inn, and later after this panel, I will be signing, if you're interested, copies of Heavy Metal, their Lord of Light issue. So please stop by. How much are we going to ask for these collector's items?
For a con special, normally, well, usually it's 35 and we'll do 25. How's that sound? And we'll both sign it. So it's an issue 276, the one with the dark light and black light and stuff that was in it. But it's a great issue. There's a great writer, me. This article is how I was working with Jack. And well, we might as well say it while we got maybe another minute. But we made pins this year, 2-inch pins of some of the characters that Jack and I worked on. And at 519, Eatonware, and you'll see some pictures of it, I hope. So, just 1 second.
So you said that's going to be...
What was that?
Where was the booth again?
519 is the pins.
No, Mike.
Oh, Mike's
Oh, 5112. It may not be the exact table, but you won't miss me. I got the smallest space. I have the smallest space, but some really great stuff under the table. Just ask and I'll tell you what it is.
Are they selling the pins at that location?
And it's all G-rated.
Are you selling the pins at the booth?
No, they're at
519.
519.
Eatonware. And these are the actual, a bunch of the drawings. We just took them out, had them colored by Wally N. Morton, who's a well-known doll creator. And here we are. It worked. Thank you for coming.
Mike, what's the Donnelly's booth number again? 512. The Donnelly's booth. The Donnelly, where we are.
5112. Cool Lines Art.
Right next to the art.
Lots of Mike Royer Disney original art for sale. Lots of Jack Kirby, Mike Royer trade paperbacks, hardcover books. The latest new 10-pound huge Bronze Age Jack Kirby book. And I can get the inker to sign it for you.
Well, I have a feeling maybe we should start. Is the film on? Video? Sound? Okay, so I think we're going to do first is have a little intro.
There has been a dramatic development concerning other Americans in Iran, who probably would also be hostages today, except for...
When the embassy was overrun, we were immediately on a wartime footing. Along comes a memorandum from the State Department saying, by the way, 6 of our people escaped, and they're in the care of the Canadians. Could you please think about how you might get them out too? So now we got a problem. How are we going to get them out ahead of hostile pursuit?
The Iranians don't know they're there.
But they will rather soon. My biggest problem, creating a deception that everybody could believe in. A Hollywood location scouting party. We stole the script from The Lord of Light. It was a defunct production. Mythology, sci-fi, and mystical things. If you read the script, it is very hard to follow. It is very convoluted. My guys went in, set up the production offices on the old Columbia Studio lot in Hollywood. This is a Friday. By Tuesday, 4 days later, we were up and running.
You're posing as a Hollywood producer making a fictitious script, Lord of Light.
Yes. The telephone that somebody's going to answer, oh yeah, they're out there scouting a location. And then we made this portfolio that had everything in it that I would carry along with me, and that's the window dressing. Say, okay, that's you, and that you're the location manager, you're transportation coordinator, the set designer, and they all just loved it. You know, everybody wants to be from Hollywood. And we arrived on the 25th of January. We went in and marched them out 3 days later.
What happens at the end of Lord of Light?
I have no idea. I didn't have time to read it.
Good morning. I just love that. You know, when my article in, I'm Barry Ira Geller, and I don't know who he is. Mike Royer, and I'm introducing Mark Newbauer, who's producing The Skin Trade, George R.R. Martin's novella, and also, should I say it? He's buying Lord of Light from me. So, and that took a very interesting story, which we're going to get into today. But around the time of 2001, I started getting all kinds of phone calls. What's this guy talking about? You know, like this Mendez guy, because that was from a documentary, a television documentary called the, what was it called again? The Little Green Men? No. Little Gray Men, right? And it opened up the whole world to me, and everyone was so stunned. And 18 years later, 17 years later, now, the last few years, what has been so amazing to all of us is that Jack Kirby's work, the work that him and I designed, we took a year to make 12 different or 13 different drawings, pounding away. And it's become part of human consciousness. It started, and that's part of what I'm hoping to explore, how that happened. And right now, whenever we look at Lord of Light, what comes to mind is Jack Kirby's work, the Mike's inking, that's unbelievable. And so it's an interesting thing how time works, how the unity of life is sometimes. You look back and how connected things were. I was in film school in the 70s, and I had decided that I really wanted to do something. This is before Star Wars, if there was such a time, and I wanted to be involved in some spiritual related or psychic powered kind of a film. I had already been pitching the powers that may be on telepathic detective stories, and just rejected and thrown out everywhere. All the science fiction stuff I was into just got thrown out. I was kicked out the door, so to speak. And then I'm out there in Hollywood as a writer, and I meet, through a director, I met a lot of different people, and then I came across someone who had an option on Lord of Light, who wanted to hire me to write some other script or fix some other script. And I went, forget that. And I pitched him on my view of the love story, the triangle, and the passion that I felt for Roger Zelazny's characters. And then one thing led to another. He decided to leave the project, and I bought it. Bing. And then, this is now 1976 or 7. And I had worked for a year as an associate producer in television for a man that had two number 2 hits, Run for Your Life, Jesus, another one. But anyway, I had learned how to work with attorneys, and I learned how to work with agents, and I learned how to option stuff, because that's all he would do. He would look at stuff, and so it comes along. I get an option on the property, and then I'm wondering, well, I went to see a bunch of different artists, and I said, do something like Jack Kirby. And the reason I remembered Kirby is that the last comic books that I read, maybe 12 years earlier, I was in the Bronx at the newsstand reading the beginning issues of Fantastic Four and Challengers of the Unknown, and which even Green Arrow, when I saw certain characters and artwork that did something to my head, I swear. It was just, my father, of course, wanted me to get rid of all my comics because he had books everywhere, hard-covered books. He said, well, you got to get rid of that stuff because it's gonna ruin your mind. And I just never told him that my mind was already ruined. So the first artist I think of is Jack Kirby. Really, that's how it actually happened. And no one could do it really good, and then I had that light bulb moment. And this is really what we're about today, talking about. Why not call up Jack? And I did. And I met him. I had no idea of what was happening in the comics industry prior to that. None, zero, zip. And I went to his studio. He gave me a copy of Silver Surfer, but he was upset that his name wasn't on it, of all things. Because, the graphic novel with, the Silver Surfer like that, which I still own and signed. But it preceded the next year of developing these drawings, and which are now what were used to free those people from Iran. And from the best of my research, these guys would have been killed if they had found out. I mean, this was serious. They didn't like us. And, and still don't if anyone reads newspapers. So long story short, I was trying to build a theme park, and I got Ray Bradbury, Paolo Soleri, Bucky Fuller, and Don Broadbent, famous holographer, physicist. Bradbury. Yeah, Ray Bradbury. I think I mentioned. Anyway, we were all like children, and people say, "Well, how'd you get these people? And I said, well, I just called them up. What's your problem? The thing is, I was so focused on Lord of Light and the idea of changing the consciousness of children. That was my goal, that was my purpose, to change the consciousness of children in the future. What better place to do is to build a theme park, use Jack Kirby's designs as the sets of different buildings. I mean, one of the great ones that's on the cover of Heavy Metal, that was my restaurant row. Everyone would pay a few $1 million to get their restaurant over there, and that was my film budget. That's how I was financing the film, so I can maintain the control. I went through tons of stuff then, which Mark's going to talk about in the current scene, of fighting people just to get some creative work done. So I ended up wanting to do it myself. And that's, well, whatever we ran into. I'm not going to get into that too much. But that's, I didn't meet Mike until the great moment at Comic Fest, when Mike Towery, who was sitting right there, ran after me one day and said, hey, how would you like to talk at Comic Fest? And I went, sure. What's that? But joking. And that's where I actually met Mike Reuter. And it was like right there, we were talking to the audience, saying, hey, it was like he was my Rain Man. And so it all began to gel, and then the Argo movie came out, and then, which was, we won't even talk about too much, but, because it only had half the story, and it left out Jack. And that made me very furious. It also made about 10 million other people furious. But, so the idea then is, the last couple of years, I've been just gathering momentum to bring Jack's work back into the world, because it's the only thing that he did that is not owned by Marvel or Disney right now. And I'm very happy about that.
Well, one day Jack called me and he said, I've got some new stuff for you to work on. He says, it's not for DC, it's not for Marvel, and someone else's name will be on the checks. And that was all I was told. And these incredibly fantastic pieces of art arrived at my house, and they just blew me away. And I think it's some of the finest art that Jack Kirby ever produced. And between the two of them talking, and then Jack letting his imagination, unleashing the imagination, came up with these incredible structures. The environment for first the science fiction land project, and then what things would look like in a movie, and which is why it convinced the Iranians that it was real. But it was interesting. All I was told is that it's not for Marvel, it's not DC, and someone else will be signing the checks. And then years later, at Comic Fest, we finally met.
And it was really amazing because Jack he was a man of honor in 6,000 different ways. He kept it confidential. He knew how to do that. I think though, with all his generosity, just a word about that, his generosity and honesty, I think it presented to many thinking that they could, steal from him. And I'm here, and the last couple of years I've been fighting off the very same thing. And I'm happy to preserve it and merge it into the future. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I get a call from some guy named Mark Newbauer. And he called me up for a year. See, this is what does our imagination take us? Why can we persist and then the world changes? Because it's really, I think the only thing that I've had is an active imagination and refusal to take no for an answer. It's amazing what happens when you're really there for doing what you want to do. And I was fortunate enough to have the best people to work with that helped me do that. Jack, to me, was the general. I called him that. And I'm actually paying the estate, the same amount I was going to pay him, gross amount, and a part goes to the Kirby Museum. And I love it, you know. So I'm getting a call. This was, 4 years ago? 4 years ago?
2014.
So, okay, 5 years ago. Start hearing from Mark Newbauer, and he calls me up for a year. And I was saying, well, how much you give me? And not enough, you know. But then we started to talk, and I heard more about his ambition, and I can hear like myself in him. And he's the one that introduced me to Gail Ann Hurd, who created Terminator and The Walking Dead and a lot of things in between, which included some, I think, being married to Cameron for a while. Is that right? Anyway.
A lot of women were.
Never mind. So,
But she's the one that alerted Corman to Cameron's talent in the first place.
that's right. Here, you can bring that closer.
Sorry. Just had to throw that in there for Gail.
So, the moment that Gail looked at it, we went right to negotiation. It was the stuff you hear about in fiction, and it was like she was after the project since she was in college, but then entered Universal and UCP and all the other politics, and after 2 years, Universal decided not to buy it. And so one day, I had another bright idea a few months later. I called up Mark, and I said, how would you like to buy it? And he said,
My partner and I were thinking the same thing on the other side all the while.
So why don't you talk about where you've come from and how you're now working with some of the biggest properties that you can't talk about yet, but that are in various stages of production. It's really, it's like the connectivity to me and Mike from 40 years ago. 40 years ago. Whoa. And here he is, and he's like right in our midst in that sense, and I thought that would be a good theme.
Well, thank you. And you and Mike have inspired so much just listening to you now that I wish I could just kind of throw up everything and you guys sort it out. It's all just stacking up in my head. But thank you for coming, and it's just an honor to be amidst legends who have worked with legends who are here now, with the torch brightly burning. I feel like a kid snuck onto the spaceship with all these geniuses. But Barry and I met, as he said. I told it pretty candidly the other night, right? I had a issue of Variety or Hollywood Reporter on my desk. I shared an office with a filmmaker who does like mockbuster features. The Incredible Hulk comes out, they make The Incredible Bulk, and they sell it in Germany. So he walked into my office and saw Barry's best friend Ben Affleck was on the cover, and he said, "Oh, did you see Argo?" I said, "Yeah, I loved it. Arguably a fantastic film, but again, what I love about here is that it failed to honor true legacy, and that's one of the reasons that I think Barry and I have bonded on this project is that, my producing partner Rich Angel and I are committed to honoring legacies. I mean, it's one of the biggest reasons I'm so excited about Lord of Light. But there was that book on the desk, and yes, at the time, I was right in the middle of just having secured some investing partners, or my producing partner, Rich Angel, did the heavy lifting there to outright purchase the rights for an option that I had gotten on George Martin's The Skin Trade, which is arguably one of the best werewolf pieces of fiction ever written, World Fantasy Award-winning novella. And I had, just like reaching out to Barry, I tangent a lot. I'm reading a book called Talk Like Ted. It teaches you how to actually speak publicly, but I'm about 10 pages in, so I won't be dropping the mic after this or anything. You know, same way. I have to admit, I knew very little about George Martin when I discovered the novella. I'd love to say I was his biggest fan and I read everything, but that wasn't the case. I came across a beautiful story that really resonated with me. And I went to, it's funny, if you've been on George Martin's website, it looks like that thing that, you know, your cousin says, oh, my little brother can code, and they put together that's what his website looks like. So I thought, well, I'm just going to email this guy and tell him I love his werewolf book. And this was 2 years before HBO greenlit Game of Thrones. This was in 2007. I just emailed him, and he said, oh, that sounds neat. I always thought that should be a movie, and talked to my manager, you know. So it took me 2 years to figure out how to option a book. I was coming off of a film that I went to film school in Chicago, Columbia College. I told my parents I wanted to go to college so that I could really go to Second City, which is where I studied improv with some of the greats, Del Close, and some of those just amazing improv legends. So got to live out kind of a dream there. But at Columbia, you know, just met some really cool people. Put together a film with the late great Burt Reynolds, the late great Alan King, comedian Chris Elliott, and some others that just kind of fell apart. Fraudulent financing, which, as I understand, was a big part of how the original Lord of Light kind of didn't work out. Our journeys are so similar. It's crazy. When I'm on the zone of Lord of Light, I feel like I've been reincarnated as Barry, and only tasked to carry on the legend and the legacy. So it's crazy because the stories are so parallel. I won't hog the conch shell here. I'll be done in a minute. So that film fell apart, and I decided, wrong mindset, but led to a very good thing. I thought, well, nobody wants to do my stuff because it was a script I wrote. So I'm going to look for something somebody else wrote and do something with it. And among the list was, you know, were the Twilight books, which were just snapped up by a small company, they said when I called them. And about 50 other books, and there was the George Martin one, and it just glue in the dark for me for some reason. And again, it's Barry said it, just ask, right? Only because I didn't realize how big George was even at the time among his fantasy fans, his readers, was I able to approach him so casually and respectfully, but real, you know, with you and Jack Kirby.
It's very much
me
the
and
same.
you.
As long as they like your ideas.
Right.
You can really call up anybody.
Well, we live in an age now, thanks to CGI, where in television and feature films, there isn't anything that you can't do, except come up with stories that are worth a darn and characters that you care about. So I think we're at a point in history that there's a reason for everything, and maybe it took this long for us to get Lord of Light on screen for when we could do anything that was necessary visually to tell a story that was about something and about people that you could care about.
Fantastic point, right? Without the distraction of do I believe that or not? Well, yes, you do now because of the technology. Absolutely. That's a great point. We were just talking about, no spoilers, but if you've seen Spider-Man Far From Home, you can probably draw some analogies to some of the technological wonders that are described in Lord of Light. Shazam, if you saw that, the statues in the Dark Hall remind me very much of the Rakasha, you know, trapped in their little realms. It's just really amazing seeing Aquaman, the Celestial City. I mean, all of these elements that are coming out in these movies, you can tell were heavily inspired by
The Lord of Light.
Lord of Light.
And, and George's homage, of course, to the book that inspired him to write, and he says this, Game of Thrones. Who's that character called Lord of Light in Game of Thrones? If you do a search right now and say Lord of Light, you get 2 pages of Game of Thrones. I begin to see it as like a flow of imagination, a flow of time through our lives, and I'm blown away. I haven't met George, but I know he's been real close with Roger Zelazny's son, Trent Zelazny, and I think the future is going to be filled with many versions of Lord of Light. There have been so many films that have been inspired by Roger Zelazny's book and Jack's artwork. I mean, it's like he's so indelible. Is that the right word?
Yeah. Works for me.
He is a devil. He's permeated the zeitgeist, if we can use some other big words to describe Jack, but it's true.
Well, people talk about when you're gone. Jack's legacy is that he will never be gone. Jack Kirby and his work are immortal.
Yes.
And they have influenced so many writers and artists and filmmakers and that he will always be with us, even though many people don't know the connection. It's just there. But if they were to investigate everything that came before, so much of it, in my opinion, goes back to Jack.
Absolutely. And that imagination, we were talking last night, it's just so fascinating to me, and then I'll press unpause on how we met, but what's so fascinating to me is that Barry, as you discussed, was inspired by Kirby's work 12 years before. I mean, this permeated your brain. He painted your brain. And in reading Lord of Light and thinking, how can this be adapted? What happens but you contact Jack, and now you're giving him ideas and concepts based on what had already been painted by him through you back to him on paper.
Yes.
It's just an incredible circle.
The way it's been explained to me by my later life, I've gotten into certain levels of spirituality, but the way it's been expressed to me is that the future creates the present, not the other way around. We're really there it's a lot of great in the Avengers, the last Avengers, there was some good talk about time travel. It's actually correct. But where we're going right now is that whatever we do with Lord of Light, we have a statement in the history that it was the Kirby work that made it happen, that saved those lives. Because if in reality, if that's what that crew, the CIA, was just doing those chicken tracks that was shown at the end of the film, they would have all been killed, literally. And what I like about what Mark is doing is that he starts off with a guy that big CAA now set up his own company as a what is he? Is he like a
manager?
Super agent?
Producer
Super
and a
agent.
manager, yeah.
Right, and
Super
he's
everything.
been organizing right into the business with HBO and a couple of other properties that are just flying all around. And it's great to know that is also, see, when Lord of Light gets together, that's why I use the word collides, because we have the new energies of George R.R. Martin and his work And then we have Lord of Light, Roger Zelazny's. That was inspiration for a bunch of TV shows.
That's right.
Go ahead.
Well, and that's John Levin, who's at Forward now. John was with CAA for 40 years, and you look him up, and John's. I could throw out any actor, movie, that you're familiar with, and John had something to do with it. He's been part of packaging and putting together, I believe, over 100 projects or more have earned Academy Awards that John Levin has been a part of packaging and putting together while at CAA. And he has been, for me, that mentor that you would that you would dream about having. And that happened by accident when I tried so hard to get the rights to Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere. And John's like, well, who the fuck are you, Pardon my French, but it's kind of that. But the nice thing is John asked that actually in a pretty genuine way, which was flattering and surprised me, because knocking on a lot of doors, as we all know, I mean, they many times are slammed, if not just closed very politely. And John opened his door to someone that he didn't know. I had just finished up a low-budget space sci-fi horror that recently premiered on streaming and otherwise, Beyond White Space. And John said, what else are you doing? Why, what do you do? And we kind of got to talking, and he's since, I don't want to overstate it, but taken me under his wing in a way, in that John and I are now working together with my producing partner, Rich Angel, and some really exciting players that I can't talk about, unfortunately, yet. Maybe possibly in a week from now would be a very different story. But John has assembled an incredible team with us for the George Martin adaptation. And it's something that again, 2007 is when I emailed George Martin for the first time. So it's very difficult not being able to talk about certain things, but we are just so excited about the developments there. And not plugging, this is just more so you can follow, but my company's name is Mike the Pike Productions, and you can find us on Facebook and Twitter and the web and all that, and that's where we'll be, announcing. Once the trade's announced, then we'll follow suit with announcements accordingly on that project and others. Image Comics, Mice Templar is a book series that I'm just in love with. Brian Glass and Mike Oming put that together with Victor Santos, who has Polar on Netflix. Victor did Polar. And it's just so humbling, I guess, being surrounded by and now working with these amazing people, people like that. But back to Lord of Light, I reached out to Barry because, Ted walked into my office. He saw Ben Affleck's face. He said, "Did you see it?" I said, "Yeah, I loved it." He said, "Well, that movie in there, the fake movie, is based on a real book called Lord of Light." And I said, "Oh, really?" He goes, "Yeah, it's a sci-fi fantasy novel." He says, big deal. And I said, "Oh, wow, that's pretty cool." And he just earmuffs, if anybody's offensive, it's just what he said. But he walked out of the room, and very flippantly, he said, "Well, you like that shit. You should get a hold of the guy. I heard there's some guy in California still has the rights all these years." And he also said
The man who never gives up.
That's right. He also said he heard he was eccentric. He said, "Good luck." So I kind of got that first impression as well, and probably vice versa. Never fun working with the norm, right? So I reached out to Barry, and we had some crazy back and forth. It looked like it was never going to happen, but persistence does pay. And thank God, just like John Levin, just like George Martin, they took the time. Barry took the time to get to know me and allow me to get to know him and his desires and his vision. And that 2 years later, worth of us, I want to say 2 years, a year and a half at least, of Well, because we let it die for a while. It seemed like it wasn't going to happen. And then we reached out again a year later, and then Barry and I got on the phone for hours a night at times.
And we made a deal.
In February 15, and we made a deal.
It's amazing what you can do if you communicate.
Yeah.
And I think, how do you find the industry today? And, you know, because in getting your property, see, I learned from the mentor, the guy like, that's how I learned back in the 70s how to deal with those things. It's really tough. You have to be very tough in negotiating with these guys. You know,
Yeah.
like, or else they take advantage of you. I remember when I worked for my producer friend, my boss, and his partner at the time was a past president of MGM, a guy named, doesn't matter. But he said to me, my boss said, well, if I let him, he'll rip me off. And these are these two big, powerful men who were doing film, television stuff. So I would suppose it's still the same right now.
Well, business affairs are trained to do so, and very. I mean, they're like those. What are the British Guard called that wear the big hats and stand outside, and they're incorrigible in that they're doing what they are trained to do, and that's every penny, through this door, please. Every ancillary right, bring it on, or there's no deal, things like that. But I will say on the flip side, the industry itself, as coming from the background of an indie filmmaker, you hear, oh, Hollywood, and let's just film in Montana instead because they're all jerks out there, and there's a lot of backstabbing. They'll do this, they'll do that. But it's like, it's not the case, and it all comes down to mindset and why you're doing what you're doing. It's about your why. And in that book I'm reading, it says, if you're not doing something that makes, this is their words, but that makes your heart sing, then you shouldn't be doing it. Those of us that embrace what makes our heart sing, and you must do so fearlessly because there's something in the universe that's making your heart sing and be drawn toward that. That's your natural path, right? So as I've noticed, these legends, the Gale Ann Hurds and the John Levins and the great people we're working with.
Mike Royer.
Mike Royer, Barry Geller, these George Martin, they recognize that, and they're highly collaborative in that. I think where all that bad sentiment comes from are people simply approaching the industry for the wrong reasons, with the wrong mindsets, and without really thinking about, what it takes and who they're talking to. And so to just answer your question, Barry, I think the industry is truly friendlier than ever. The doors are always open for good people with good ideas. And you've got to have both if you're going to get past, maybe one.
Well, it's interesting that today, the last time I heard anybody that knew what they were talking about, said that there are over 500 scripted television series in production. Now, when I grew up, there were like 3 networks and a couple of independent stations, if you were lucky, nearby where you lived. Now we've got everybody is producing new content.
Right.
And I think this is a very healthy environment for actors, if they want to act, not be stars, but act.
Outstanding.
Writers who want to write. And I think we are now in a time when people are more receptive to ideas they might have turned down 40 years ago because they may have instinctually realized that there was not the means to produce this the way it deserved to be done.
Absolutely.
So that's why I think we are in the right time.
Ready Player One's a great example. That's such a great point, Mike. Absolutely. Oh, sorry. Got a sign going. Oh, thank you. 10 minutes, Barry.
Uh-huh. Well, I just had to take a picture of everybody. So they believe I'm actually was here. It's a joke. The passion that I experienced, but gentle passion. How do you express the difference when I worked with Jack? It was like we were like children that were just going bang 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 bang, and when there was a spaceship that came out with all kinds of great information. They parked it somewhere. I think was it Mars or something like this. Jack was really upset because he said it shows our location. As far as E.T. to him was very real, and you can imagine when I talked about the gods to him, he was right there. He was waiting for years and years and years to really do something that he didn't have an editor on, telling him how to bring it down. And like the stories I heard at the time were just amazing and remarkable of the small minds that he had to contend with at Marvel, and he actually embraced the Lord of Light property, saying something like, "Well, he would have auditioned for it if he had to be involved," and I was really surprised for him to say that. But that's the idea, and of the kind of creativity and that he was, but all the aspects of honor. And it makes sense to me that what started 40 years ago, or 45 years ago in my little mind at the time, and of what I wanted to do with my life as a filmmaker, it just took a few years, like you said, to finally come to fruition. And who knows, maybe we'll still build a theme park.
That'd be incredible.
So,
no, I mean, that's what we plan to do. We were talking last night, and I really, as a producer, as a creative, I love Lord of Light and all the potential that it holds as a story and the world building. But the legend behind the legend, as I call it, for lack of a better term, because that's what it is to me, this team of brilliant minds. I mean, Barry, you said it. It's you, it's Mike Royer, it's Jack Kirby, it's Ray Bradbury, it's Bucky Fuller. Legendary minds. We're all part of the radius here, and it's nothing but an honor and just an exciting pleasure to be able to be spearheading the adaptation with Barry's blessing. And I think we've got some really, breaking down this story is not an easy task, but it is a fun one. It's a fun challenge, and I think we've done that in a very exciting way, and we'll continue to do so as we identify a showrunner and a network or studio that really melds with that vision, so that unlike an Argo, which fails to recognize the legacy of Jack.
And a lot of other people.
And a lot of other people.
Well, I think the meeting of Jack Kirby and Ira Geller was one of those magical things that just needed to happen. As Jack was an incredible creative genius who, at dinner, could create, during dinner, the whole first issue of Demon in his head. I went to lunch with him once to talk about a project, and I said, my God, this is a lot of stuff for one issue. And it was for 7 issues. It was all done in his head, but this was still under the constraints of working with publishers and editors who had certain boundaries that they weren't ready to approach yet, or that they wanted to tamper with, so that they could say, and I did this for Jack.
Yeah.
And these two minds got together, and with his love of the property, and Jack now being in an opportunity to literally, nobody could stop him.
I said, do whatever you like. Within bounds, like there's one of those drawings that I had to say, well, Jack, this is going to be a little hard to build, because each of the drawings were doubling as a promotion for the film and the theme park. So I showed it to guys who were in Vegas and other places, big builders, Canada, but there was only one of them. But we would do like questions like, what does the streets of heaven look like? And what kind of electronics are there? And what kind of consciousness, to discuss really building this world. I think we are going to run out of some time. I'd like to put it open if anyone has some questions. Please stand up.
Test 1, 2. Test, thank you. So it sounds like you're saying Lord of Light is in development to be a film or movie. Can you just tell us the latest status of that?
The status is definitely early development. Full transparency, I am still purchasing the rights from Barry. We're into it, so it's pretty great. And all the while, Barry's given us his blessing and freedom to do this development. But long story short, we see this as more of a TV series than a film, so we can take that world and break it up and expand it. I mean, we were talking about it last night, really get into the day-to-day of the commoners, if you will, as well, and show how the powers that be are not only hoarding technology, but natural medicine, and taking away their belief systems and implanting a new one so that they have the real control of God.
Exactly. I mean, when you get down to it, Ayama, that's the third guy, the death god, but he's that third part of the triangle. He comes up with this thing called a mind probe, and that was his big thing. He would keep people, just hypnotic or hypnotized, and then they would control rebirth so that if you weren't a good guy, have enough karmic credit,
We do three more quick ones?
Anyway, okay, one more question. Well, 1.5 more questions. 2 more questions.
So there's one other artist in this that you've barely touched on, and I was just curious if you had any stories or had ever talked to the original author of Lord of Light, Zelazny, about his thoughts on it becoming something from the page to the screen.
Real quickly, he at that time, and up in my year was probably the last year, in those days you would sell everything. So when I got my contract, it had every possible thing in the universe in one contract. And they don't do that anymore. In fact, not since Star Wars, when they realized, the estates would realize, hey, there's 50 things we can sell, why sell it all at once? So I did speak with him, but I really dealt with Doubleday.
Well, I was going to tell him that the answer is 42. The question was wrong.
Yes, sir.
Okay, one of the major themes is identity. And you talked about at this point in history. So the technology that they can swap bodies, you have characters that swap sexes. Now, that was kind of a minor other than one plot point to the story. But at this point in history and politics, and Zelazny himself said he didn't have a problem with politics and stories if it was part of the theme and part of the story and a logical progression. So what are your thoughts on handling the transgender in today's era? Because Brahma, multiple incarnations, is still uncomfortable. You have the King of Thieves.
Yes.
We love it. It's so relevant.
Excellent question. Excellent question.
The story, Gail said it before we could spit it out, but the story is more relevant today than it may have been then, because of the fact that these issues, which were just as relevant then, but unfortunately hidden. Now people are starting to be able to say, I can be who I want to be, and Brahma's struggling with this. So our adaptation, just spitballing and things, though, are that, Brahma down on Earth was a gender-neutral billionaire, and because, had that wealth and that ability, just happened to have a fascination with the Hindu pantheon.
Now, was that based on
We're getting...
this isn't a question, did that come from Zelazny's backstories that he wrote for his
That's kind of my backstory in my head, really. That's
He did that for all his characters in his novels. I don't know if you got a hold of that material, but he wrote backstories that never made it into the books.
I'm not aware of it. I'd love to see those. That's just a concept my producing partner Rich and I came up with. So
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming.
thank you, Mike and Barry. Thank